Billions of people in hundreds of nations have not yet heard the good news about Jesus. The majority of these unreached people pass on their community history and values orally, primarily through stories, along with songs and dance. While many languages now have a translation of all or part of the Bible, only a small fraction of people are able to read it.
One of the most effective ways of reaching these oral peoples is through stories from the Bible in their heart language. God's Story for Our People workshop helps local Christians prepare stories in their native language and teaches them how to use the stories to reach their people with the gospel.
A mutual friend put us in contact with Pastor Solomon in Zambia. Pastor Solomon has teams that travel to villages to plant churches. He was very excited to hear about God's Story workshop and took it on himself to make all the on-the-ground preparations for the projects in Zambia.
The trip from our home in Ukraine to Kapiri-Mposhi, Zambia, took more than a day. 2-hour drive to the airport, 20 hours via Dubai to Zambia, then another 5 hours from Lusaka to Kapiri. The main north-south highway in the country, and the only paved one, carries hundreds of heavily laden trucks from the Zambian Copperbelt mining area and to the closest seaport in neighboring Tanzania.
We started the God Story project with a week-long trainer's training. 7 church leaders, whom Pastor Solomon dubbed coaches, learned how to prepare stories, start and lead story discussion groups, and train discussion group leaders.
In Kapiri, we stayed in the master bedroom of an unfinished house, with a couple of our coaches in a second bedroom, and Mbanga, the landlord's son, in a third.
We had a bathtub and toilet with working drains, but no running water. The house had a tap out back that had water a few hours a day, and a shallow well out front. A huge plastic barrel served as our water supply, and we used a big basin for bathing and a bucket to flush the toilet.
Malaria is endemic in the area, but fortunately, Pastor Solomon provided us with a good mosquito net for the bed, and we made ourselves a coffee table out of a stack of floor tiles in the corner.
After training the coaches, we taught 20 local Christians, dubbed storytellers, how to develop stories in the Bemba language. Our coaches did a great job of walking them through the process of preparing stories and training them to lead story discussion groups.
In the afternoons, the storytellers spread out around the neighborhood to gather people, teach the stories they'd prepared, and lead story discussions. And kids loved putting on dramas based on the stories.
My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do.
At the end of 3 weeks, we had 50 Bible stories in ordinary, everyday Bemba language.
We had a week's break before the next soaring workshop, so Pastor Solomon and his wife Beauty took Warren and me on a trip across Zambia to the town of Livingstone.
The first day we visited Victoria Falls. The Zambezi River was very high due to recent rains, and the spray was so dense that we could only see a small part of the falls.
The next 2 days we visited the Mosi Oatunya, the Smoke That Thunders game park above the falls. There we saw giraffe, elephant, rhino, lots of smaller game and birds, and no shortage of monkeys and baboons. To prepare a story, the storytellers work in story teams of 2 or 3. With their coaches, they listen to a recording of the Bible passage of the story. Then they decide how to retell the story in the simple, everyday language of their people.
Then all the storytellers gather and listen to each group's story. Together they decide how to express various biblical concepts in an understandable way. Then the teams make a recording of the story and play it for non-Christian guests who answer questions about the story and retell the story.
Then the stories are further tested by teaching and discussing them in a story discussion group. After each step, the story is modified to make it easier to understand and remember.
Then we make a recording of the story in our portable high-tech recording studio.
After our safari, we headed for Mpunde, a very small town in the heart of rural Africa.
The main highway through Mpunde is red dirt. In the mornings, very well-used Toyota passenger vans and flatbed trucks line up to take passengers and their goods to the nearest city, Kabwe, 2 hours away by very rough dirt road.
We got to make the trip ourselves to visit the Zambia Immigration Office about visa issues.
Not much agriculture around here, and even with an abundance of tall grass, very few goats or cattle. Cash crops are corn and sunflowers. Mpunde has its own corn grinding mill, and sunflower oil press. Many people cut down trees and make charcoal to sell in the city, with some making the long trip on a bicycle.
Almost everybody grows sweet potatoes and has an orange, a lemon, and a mango tree by their house. We were especially pleased that avocados were in season, with very big ripe avos costing less than $1.
In Mpunde, our coaches trained a new group of storytellers who prepared stories in the Lenje language. We met in a rented, unfinished house. In the afternoons, we fanned out to the homesteads in the area to tell stories and lead story discussions. Several times I went with Coach Clayton to lead a story discussion group with local high school students, and Elaine told stories to women at a nearby maternity clinic.
At the end of each language project, we had a story festival, with the storytellers singing songs, telling their stories, and presenting a drama based on a story. Storytellers received a certificate of participation, which is highly prized in Africa. And after the festival, everyone was served lunch.
The staple food in most of southern Africa is a very thick white porridge made from ground corn. In Zambia, it's called nshima.
Lunch and supper would be nshima and fried chicken, or sometimes nshima and fried fish, nshima and sausage, or, our favorite, nshima and boiled goat. Our nshima was always served with shredded boiled greens and a sauce of diced tomato and onion.
Elaine trained the cooks to serve us a much smaller portion of nshima. Breakfast? Very weak tea, which the locals drink with lots of sugar, and a few slices of white bread or boiled rice with tomato sauce. My favorite breakfast was whole boiled sweet potatoes.
The cooks would bring several chickens or a goat in the morning, and by lunchtime they were ready to eat. We were glad that the cooks were discreet about the process, so we only saw the finished product.
Birthday to you.
They even brought a goat for Elaine on her birthday.
Oh, yes, what am I going to do with you? I'm not taking you home.
Several Sundays, we visited village churches. Just getting there was an adventure. There was always a choir or two singing several songs each.
Then we would teach a story to the congregation. Everyone gets a chance to retell the story in pairs, then one or two retell the story to everyone. After that, we ask simple questions to lead people to discuss the stories and apply them to their lives.
For larger churches, we divide the congregation into groups and assign a question to each group. A representative reports the group's answers.
After the service, we were all served lunch. Nshima, of course. All of our coaches are pastors of rural churches. Solomon is following up with them, encouraging and mentoring them, and motivating and mobilizing their church members, and training them to start and lead story discussion groups. The coaches have recordings of all the stories for group leaders to use to learn the stories they will teach to their groups.
Please pray for the Lord to give storytellers confidence and boldness in starting and leading story discussion groups, for the Lord to guide them to people who want to hear the stories, for many Christians and churches to use the stories to spread the good news, and for many non-Christians to listen to the stories, understand them, and turn to Jesus.
And we would appreciate your prayers for the Lord to open doors for us to conduct similar story development and story training projects in Kenya, the Caucasus, and Crimea.
My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God made the trees, my God made the seas, my God made the elephants too. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do for you.
Lesani mwemanyita Rutine viwombera Benyamano na maka Umulimo wakula welesa Lesani